Relationships are arguably one of the most critical parts of adolescence. So let's dive in. Starting off by thinking about parent relationships and that sort of parent adolescent experience that happens. One of the primary developmental tasks of adolescence is the development of autonomy, which is a sense of oneself as a separate, self governing individual. So, remember when you were a child and your parents were just the coolest people ever? They knew everything, they always had all the answers. Young children idolize their parents as role models and as informants. Now, during adolescence, that all changes, and teens begin to de idolize their parents. They're no longer superheroes, they're just ordinary people. What this means is that teens are much less compliant than kids. They no longer take every word their parents say as gospel and start pushing back and challenging the limits of parental authority. Effectively parenting an adolescent can be an exercise in patience, but the most important thing a parent can do is be warm, supportive, and attentive. Now, of course, this means very different things with an adolescent versus a child. So now the challenge becomes balancing autonomy granting with monitoring, letting them try out their own wings, but still keeping in mind that their brains are vastly underdeveloped, particularly in terms of decision making and impulse control. So it's still up to the parents to modulate for them and do their best to keep the adolescent from the situations where they might not be able to recognize or handle the risk. During adolescence, the quality of the parent child relationship is the most important predictor of mental health and adjustment outcomes. But this is challenged by the conflict that arises during teenage years. Often, this conflict arises because youth are trying to assert their individuality and exercise their independence. So basically, the conflict facilitates adolescents' development of their identity and autonomy, and signals to parents that it's time to adjust their parenting style to meet the demands of a newly independent child. Fortunately, this conflict, while potentially explosive, is short lived. Usually by mid to late adolescence, the family has found a new balance and is back to harmonious interactions and yet less yelling, crying, and door slamming. Typically, youth will become closer to their parents again during late adolescence. Generally speaking, if youth and their parents enjoyed a somewhat close, trusting, and loving relationship before adolescence, these same qualities will be restored during late adolescence when that conflict sort of settles down. As the peer relationships become more central to the adolescent's life, there becomes less time available to spend with family members. But the lack of time is not the only reason for this shift away from family. The quality of both parental and peer relationships changes during adolescence, and these qualitative changes are due to greater cognitive and emotional maturity. As teens become more emotionally mature, their relationships with their peers become more trusting and more emotionally intimate. Cognitive development enables youth to better understand and anticipate the wants, needs, and feelings of their peers. This increased mental and emotional maturity means that adolescents are now better able to offer genuine emotional support and comfort to each other, as well as sensible advice. Thus, the family is no longer the only source of social support. And so, what this means moving forward is that teens will begin to care more about what their parents think. Oh, sorry, about what their peers think than their parents think. Rodkin and colleagues define goals as cognitive representations of things individuals want to accomplish. Goals provide a roadmap for behavior, allowing individuals a clear idea of what they're working towards or striving for. Now, there are many different types of goals. We have academic goals, such as succeeding in a certain field, career goals, or achieving a certain career. Um, but there's also social goals. For adolescents whose developmental tasks center around developing intimacy and autonomy in peer relationships, these social goals are of paramount importance. And within the overarching category of social goals, there are specific goals that might be important to adolescents. So, for example, social goals can be both communal or stressing interpersonal closeness, or agentic or prioritizing power and dominance. The La Fontana and Celestin article that I asked you to read for this week talks about social goals. And so we can think about, why are these goals important? Why does this matter? Um, Obviously, that's a multifaceted conversation, but the short answer is that understanding the motivation or reason behind a behavior may provide insight into why it's occurring. We know that friends are super important to adolescents and are a strong force in influencing their behaviors. And they also serve as a social support to meet interpersonal needs. Intimacy or mutual closeness is one of the most important parts of friendships, as reported by teens. And this is supported by mutual understanding of one another, that sense of, oh, you just get me. We often see this via self disclosure or the mutual sharing of information. By adolescence, friends have replaced parents as the most important source of social support. Think about it. When you were a teen, when something bad happened, who was the first person you went to? It's probably a close friend. Teens tend to be similar to their peers and become more so over time. We see this across a variety of domains: identity status, educational aspirations, deviant behavior. This is due to two separate but related effects. The first is selection effects, or the idea that adolescents select friends who engage in similar behaviors as themselves. It's been well established in the literature that adolescents select friends who behave in similar ways to them. But in addition to choosing friends who are similar, group members also become more similar over time, suggesting that group members can influence one another's behavior. This is known as a socialization effect. According to social learning theory, socialization effects occur through both observation and modeling of peer behavior and the reinforcing nature of social rewards. Individual group members are motivated to adapt their own behaviors based on observing their peers. Learning to adhere and assimilate to the behaviors of the larger a group is extremely adaptive because it allows the individual to fit in. Doing so alleviates concerns over being rejected or appearing deviant. As more individuals engage in a specific behavior, that behavior becomes perceived as correct, making it normalized and accepted within the peer group. This then leads to an exponential increase in the behavior. As more peers adopt the behavior, others are more likely to adopt it as well. This is particularly relevant in the case of deviant or problem behaviors. We also see some sex differences in friendship quality. Girls prioritize closeness and intimacy, so you'll see them doing things like hanging out to just talk, providing emotional closeness and support, self disclosing, and discussing communal concerns. On the other hand, boys prioritize dominance and competition, so they're more likely to spend their time engaging in shared activities, sports, competitive games, or talking about achievements, status, competition, or conflict. We see these differences on social media as well. Girls use more information sharing platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, while boys are often found playing communal games like Fortnite or Xbox Live. Table that for now. We'll return to the role of social media and adolescent friendships in a bit. There's a ton of benefits that come from friendships. Feeling supported and validated are major protective factors and can boost self esteem and protect against things like feeling lonely. Friends offer opportunities to explore the self and develop a deep understanding of others. They are also a foundation for future intimate relationships. Adolescent friendships are the first real foray into non family bonds and prepare teens for future romantic and adult relationships. They can also be helpful in managing stress through venting and sharing and validating of feelings, and can foster positive characteristics like empathy, sympathy, and pro social behavior, as well as improved attitudes toward and involvement in schools. But there's downsides as well. As comforting as it may be to have someone there when we need to vent or debrief, it can be a slippery slope towards co rumination, which involves repeatedly discussing and rehashing our problems and difficult feelings with someone else without coming up with a solution or resolution. Sometimes this process can be helpful. It's a way of thinking through things, weighing our options, but it can also make us feel stuck and less inclined to actually do anything constructive about a situation and our associated distress. The deeper we get into a cycle of rumination, the harder it can be to recognize that it's happening and to dig our way out. This process can be even more difficult to spot when it happens within the context of our closest relationships and can hold us back from moving forward, actually leading to symptoms of anxiety and depression. Co-rumination is more common among girls than boys, likely because girls are more likely to share things with their friends. We've already discussed aggression a little bit. Relational aggression is that which targets social relationships. When the perpetrator is an acquaintance or someone you're not that close to, it's still not great, but the effects of being victimized aren't quite as detrimental. But oftentimes, the conflict can occur between intimate friends. Ever hear the expression frenemies? Relational aggression can be absolutely devastating, and maybe one reason why girls' friendships seem to shift more than boys, and their closest friendships are of shorter duration. Now, this is not to say that boys don't use relational aggression, they absolutely do, but the effects tend to be more detrimental among girls who value their friendships more so than boys. And then there's masculine stereotypes, or teaching boys that they must be tough and isolated and that it's not cool to be intimately connected. We talked about this a bit when we covered gender development. And we see this more often interfere with friendship closeness among ethnic minority boys, perhaps because of some of the differences that exist in cultural values. Having an online presence has become a crucial component of adolescent development and identity. A recent study found that 95% of teens own or have consistent access to a smartphone, and 45% report being online on an almost constant basis. Children and adults use social media too, but there's an inverted U shaped curve such that during early adolescence, we see social media begin to skyrocket. Researchers have reported an increasing age pattern in device ownership, daily texts sent and received, and overall internet usage. In terms of social media use, just over three-quarters of adolescents reported using social media, while 13 to 18-year-olds used social media 7 days a week for an average of just over an hour per day. Here we see some data from a sample of more than 1,000 adolescents who responded to a survey about their communication strategies with friends. So, cell phone texting was the preferred means of electronic communication, with over half reporting that they used it daily. And honestly, that even sounds a bit low. A quarter of teens reported using IM and social media sites every day. And so we can sort of break this down a bit, but overall, the data points to the fact that adolescents are using social media at pretty high rates. But so, what are they doing on social media? Well, adolescent internet usage ranges from online shopping to playing online games, conducting research, maybe a little bit, and searching for health or fitness information. But the most popular use of technology among adolescents is peer communication, such as meeting new people, connecting with existing contacts, and interacting with friends. Adolescents can communicate with their peers online through a variety of different mediums, but one of the most common venues is social media. And as I mentioned earlier, girls tend to use social media for connecting through text, calling, social media sites like Facebook, Twitter. Whereas boys are still connecting, but are often doing so in competitive ways, like through online gaming. Now, we tend to hear all about the bad things associated with social media. The literature, the pop press, it's all very doom and gloom. But there are advantages as well, such as establishing peer support and connections and the ability to seek out information. But there's risks and disadvantages also, starting with the context for expressing jealousies and misunderstandings. Ever have a situation where connotation completely got lost via a text or post and it ends up creating a problem? Yeah, that can certainly be an issue on social media. There's also the possibility for personal information to become accessible to third parties, which has wide ranging implications. Everything from cyber predators to risque pictures from college popping up on the job hunt. I applied for a job not too long ago that actually asked me to post a link to my social media sites, presumably so they can check out what I've been posting. Finally, some researchers have posited that spending time on social media is problematic, not only because of potential social media related risks, but also because the time that is spent on social media detracts from time spent doing other things like daydreaming, thinking, homework, and other arguably more constructive activities. I want to talk for a minute about social status because this is something that we don't tend to think a whole lot about. So think about if I say popularity, what do you think of? What are some characteristics that make someone popular? Are popular kids liked? For a while, researchers used popularity as an all around term. But about 15 years ago, we started to notice that there might be different forms of popularity. Both live under the heading of social status, but excuse me, they're slightly different in their descriptions and also their correlates. So I want to share an excerpt from an article by Celestin and Rose. Consider two eighth graders, Tim and Jason. Tim is well liked by his peers. He's genuinely nice to others and helps out when needed. He's athletic, but doesn't use his physical abilities to aggress against others. In fact, Tim tends to avoid verbal confrontations when possible, instead, preferring to find pro social ways of solving conflicts. Compared with Tim, Jason is better known by his classmates, but is not necessarily well liked. Even peers who do not know him personally know who he is. Many of Jason's classmates imitate his style of dress and his taste in music and would like to be better friends with him so they can be part of the in crowd. Jason can be very nice to others, but can also intimidate them when provoked or angry, or manipulate social situations to his advantage. What I've just described are two different facets of social status. Perceived popularity is likely what you thought of when I first asked you to describe popularity. So, this refers to an individual's status as perceived by their peers. High perceived popularity is associated with power, dominance, and influence. It's consistently associated with both physical and relational aggression. These kids may appear to be well liked, but actually, it's more just that they have a lot of social power, and more likely, it's that they're feared. Think of Regina George from Mean Girls. People didn't actually like her, but they feared her retribution, and wanted to be part of the in crowd that she could provide. Sociometric popularity, on the other hand, also known as peer preference, is how well liked an individual is by their peers. High preference is associated with having more friends and higher quality friendships. These kids are genuinely liked by others. They're pro social, cooperative, and non aggressive. Now, researchers know quite a bit about these kids, but we know far less about the other category of perceived popularity because we really only just started to differentiate between them in the literature. Moving away now from platonic friendships, adolescence is when we start to see romantic relationships evolve, all those pubertal hormones and sexual attraction. Ugh. More than 16,000 US youth reported that they'd been involved in a romantic relationship during the past 18 months. At age 12, about one fourth of young people report romantic involvement, a figure that rises to about three-fourths by age 18. And dating goals change with age. During early adolescence, it's recreational, it's something to do. And peer status is often another motivator. It's cool to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, particularly if that person is of high status. But as we progress through to later adolescence, things like intimacy, compatibility, and social support begin to take precedence. There are many factors which can influence dating relationships. For example, relationships with parents and friends. We model what we see, so adolescents with happily married parents with good conflict resolution skills tend to have more positive dating experiences. The young man whose parents scream at each other may internalize these behaviors and view them as normative, then go on to treat their girlfriend or boyfriend that way. Similarly, a girl who sees her father abuse her mother may learn to see violence as a normal way to show affection. Which brings us to some dating challenges. We know that beginning to date too early is associated with some negative outcomes like drug use, sex, and other delinquent behaviors. Dating violence can also be a problem. 10 to 20% of US adolescents are physically or sexually abused by romantic partners. And sexual minority youth face specific challenges, such as the struggle to initiate and maintain visible romances and finding partners who have come out. I've mentioned the Netflix show. It's originally a Broadway show, but now it's on Netflix. It's called The Prom. And the premise is that there's a young girl who is out in her community, but her partner is not out. And so there's a whole lot of struggles around their relationship, and the social pressure that's placed on this couple. So interesting. It's a good movie. Check it out if you have a chance. And in our last section, we'll talk through some of the developmental challenges that can occur during adolescence.